Shakamaku. I'm Julia Uriarte.
And I'm Type Jenny.
On this week's episode of Iraq Matters, we're sitting down with the founders of the Iraqi Student Project, a grassroots nonprofit that helps to bring Iraqi students to the US so they can obtain their undergraduate degree.
This is really exciting, Julia. I cannot wait to share with you guys this wonderful story that has tremendously changed my life as an ISP student myself. I will be talking to the founders of the ISP, and later on I will be discussing the journey of two Iraqi students and how this program has changed their life.
Yeah, clearly this has been an insanely successful project, and I can't wait to hear what the founders have to say and hear how it's impacted the lives of not only you, but countless other students.
Absolutely.
So following those interviews, we're going to have a recap and analysis of the State of the Union address by our founder, Erik Gustafson.
And we will finish off with a humanitarian update and what you can do to put Iraq back on the agenda.
But first, let's go to an Iraq update with Joel Wing. Hey Joel, welcome back on the program. So great to have you again. So can you tell us what's been going on in Iraq recently? What are the updates that you think everyone needs to know about?
Well, on the security front, there's still fighting going on in Anbar province. It seems like most of the fighting is stalemated right now. You get the same news stories about fighting in the same parts of Ramadi, for example. There's all kinds of initiatives to try to get the fighters to leave the streets and leave the cities, none of which seem to have gone anywhere. One of the awakening sheiks, for example, gave a 2-day deadline for them to leave. That didn't happen. This idea of giving them amnesty, that didn't work out. There's other ones going on. So basically, things are pretty much deadlocked in Anbar right now. Politically, the Iraqi parliament just passed a new pensions law. The new pension law added a whole new group of people to the list of people who are eligible for government pensions. For example, people who fought against Saddam and the exile movement now can get pensions. The elections that are supposed to happen in April, the security situation is very important for that because if there's still violence in Anbar, for example, you can't really have any voting in any of the major cities there. Also, the Accountability and Justice Commission, which is the new de-Ba'athification commission, is going through the list of candidates, and I think they've already eliminated 200 to 300 candidates for ties to the former government. So that's going on, and everybody's giving speeches and getting ready for the election. So those are the main things going on in Iraq right now.
Okay, and then towards the end of last month, the president gave his State of the Union address. What did he say about Iraq, and what does that suggest for where U.S. policy in the region is headed?
Yeah, he mentioned Iraq 2 times in his speech. One, which is just to say that he ended the Iraq war and pulled out of the troops. He said that plenty of times before. And then it just sort of passed, and he said that the United States needs to stay with its allies in the Middle East, and he mentioned Iraq too. There was just a House Foreign Affairs Committee session with Brett McGurk about U.S. policy in Iraq. And obviously with the violence taking off in the country, there's a lot of people concerned about that. And the Obama administration is trying to speed up the process of delivering weapons to Iraq. So I think the Obama administration is getting worried about the situation in Iraq, and they're trying to provide security support to them. And I think that's what the president was talking about in the State of the Union.
All right, and then our last question is going to be focused on the theme of this issue, which is education and the Iraqi Student Project. So we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the current state of the education system in Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq's education system is really struggling. Once the Civil War ended, you had this huge increase in enrollment in kids. That's not really a problem. If you look at the numbers that the government or UN or other groups give, there's a huge amount of kids enrolled in schools because the parents think it's safer now they can do that. The problem is with the bureaucracy, the curriculum, and the dropout rate. I think the last study I saw said 44% of the students in Iraq don't finish primary school. I think that's because there's still a lot of poverty in the country, so a lot of kids will start in the earlier grades, and then eventually they'll drop out because they have to go work to support their families. They need 7,000 schools or something like that. And so starting last year, the Education Ministry started this program where they're going to knock down old schools and build new ones. So they literally knocked down thousands of schools. I think in Diyala province, for example, they knocked down like 300 or 400 schools. And then because of the bureaucracy, they never built new ones. So they just made the situation worse, which is just another sign of how the Iraqi government is dysfunctional. So the education system is really struggling. It's not because people don't want to go there and they have a really high enrollment, but in terms of finishing, in terms of the education they get, in terms of meeting the demand for schools, it's really bad right now in Iraq.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your insights. It's always great to have you here on the show.
Hello. Today I'd like to introduce two people who have tremendously changed my life, Gabe and Teresa. I met these two in late 2007, early 2008, and joined the journey of the Iraqi Student Project since. So without further ado, here's Gabe and Teresa. Hi guys.
Hello.
Good morning,
Hi.
guys.
So let's start off with a simple questions which I have always wondered myself is why did Gabe and Teresa decide to choose to live in Syria and call Damascus home?
We had been ready to do something to retire from our work. Teresa was a teacher and I was a publisher. And the time seemed right in 2005. Things were increasingly rough in Iraq. So Damascus seemed the main place that Iraqis were going as refugees. So that's where we went, not knowing in 2005 what we'd end up doing, except keeping our eyes open for what needed doing that we were capable of.
Excellent. So with that in mind, what influenced you to start the Iraqi Student Project?
I think what we saw in Damascus, the numbers that were growing toward 1 million or 1.5 million by 2006 and 2007 as people fled the violence in Iraq and tried to contemplate what can we do. And it seemed that one of the saddest things about what was happening is that the higher education system in Iraq was a shambles, and that although Syria was extremely generous to the refugees from Iraq in allowing the children and teenagers to attend elementary school and high school free, they could not extend that same thing to the university. So young Iraqis were, unless they had money, which by far most didn't, could not go on to higher education. So that's how the idea came. Maybe we can help a few Iraqis to continue their education. And from that, ISP began to take shape in our minds. And then in 2007, we incorporated it as a not-for-profit here in New York State and got the 501c3 from the IRS. And from then on, we were working from Damascus while friends here formed a board and were doing some of the U.S. part of the work.
When I went to Syria, honestly, I never thought that the possibility of me joining a program that is going to help me come and study in the United States is a possibility. So how did you two make this happen?
Well, it wasn't only the two of us who made it happen. You know, we were living in Damascus. We got the idea. We hurriedly formed a board. And when we returned to Damascus, we were fortunate that there's many native English speakers from the US, from the UK, from Australia that were studying Arabic in Damascus. And we were able to capitalize on that pool of very smart people who were coming to learn Arabic and ask them to be volunteer teachers with the Iraqi Student Project. And then in the U.S., we had people who were volunteers helping us find colleges. And it was a whole community. Once we heard the idea and got it going, others joined us.
What other challenges would you say you faced with us being from the first group of the Iraqi Student Project?
The big challenge was that neither of us had done anything like this before in terms of organizing it. And we had no experience of what it takes to prepare international students for study in U.S. universities. We had no experience of what the processes were for the TOEFL test of English that an international student has to take and score high in. We had no experience of the visa application process, and basically no experience of how to work with colleges and universities in the U.S. so that they would extend a tuition waiver or provide a scholarship for an Iraqi student. So as we started off, we just met these things one at a time, tried to learn what we needed to know, tried to translate that into practice with the students there. You know, that very first year, which you were part of, we were pretty awkward at it, but we got better quick. And then each of the 5 years that we worked from September to June with a group of students, I think got a little better.
So can you talk a little bit about this? Because back in Damascus, when I first joined the Iraqi Student Project, Gabe and Teresa had us working with the Writers' Workshop, and then they developed the Literature Circle after that. So can you guys please elaborate a little bit on that?
Let me say first that what we quickly realized with the young Iraqis was that their spoken English was often excellent, but what they lacked was skills that would be needed in colleges in the U.S. in writing, in reading, in presentations, and in listening to lectures, and in participatory education. There had been no experience in those areas, and we learned that's really, forget this good spoken English.
Yeah.
You can't even pass the TOEFL with that. You've got to get into the skills with reading and writing.
And so that led us into two different approaches. One was using materials from Oxford University Press. They gave us a grant, and their materials were all about college prep. So there was a book called Lecture Ready, and there were CDs of lectures, college level, that the students needed to listen to and take notes and learn how to process in that form of education that they would meet at a liberal arts college. We had academic reading that was in Oxford University Press materials also. But as you mentioned, the Writers' Workshop was a vital part of what we did. And we met every Friday, and we used the model that I was familiar with in my own teaching, which was based on the National Writing Project. And as a teacher, I had been in the Central Coast Writing Project in California, and later in the Chicago Area Writing Project. And the model is the students write. So every week we would come together. We had an opening song that kind of called us into a writing space. People did a quick write and turned to a partner and read out loud and shared. And then we had a theme for the day that students would write and again share in a response group. And it was so successful that by the end of the year, we were able to publish a book of the students' writings. And all of the years of ISP, we published a book.
That's amazing, man. I cannot believe that it has been so long since I was part of that. But, okay, so what do you think has been the most successful thing about this journey?
Well, we never had ambitions beyond saying that this is going to be one small but good thing that Americans could do as reparations to the Iraqi people for all the damage we had done, beginning who knows when, but certainly beginning with the sanctions in 1990 until 2003. And then the invasion and the occupation and the disregard for the welfare of ordinary people in Iraq. So we saw it as reparations, and it did allow many American people, especially once the students began coming to the U.S., to be able to experience a person from this culture, from this ancient and strong place. So those connections were made. But what I think succeeded is that for the most part of the 60 students who came here over those 5 years on scholarships, by far most, have succeeded in their studies. Half of them have graduated now. Some of them are in graduate programs in their field. Others are working and applying for graduate studies. Their lives, which may be spent here, which may be spent somewhere else, which may eventually be spent in Iraq, that's the good that was done.
I agree with Gabe that the legacy of Iraqi Student Project is really the life of each student and what they're choosing to do. For example, we had a student who came to Goucher College in Baltimore thinking he would be a biology major, and halfway through switched to peace studies, and that's what his degree is in. And now he's going to apply to graduate school for an MA in peace and conflict resolution. Another example is a student who went to Clark and majored in physics and chemistry, but during a summer experience teaching young people realized that he could pull himself into the world of education, and so he's looking for graduate work to get an MA in education and concentrate on ways to help improve the education system in Iraq and Syria. So those are two examples of students that are looking at grad school as a way to change. But we have a young woman who's in Denver, and her service and volunteer work in the community has been with teenagers who are at risk in the inner city, and here she is helping them with literacy skills. So that's a great legacy. The other thing, as Gabe mentioned, is the way that Americans came to know Iraqis when students came to their city. So as each student came, we tried to form a support group of friends who would surround them and help them with any financial difficulties, for example, getting their health insurance, emotional changes of coming to a different culture, being friends with them, helping them know how to live in the winter. And that kind of thing helped the Americans see the face of Iraq in a new way. Not in the way it's portrayed on the news, not in the way it's portrayed in daily papers, but to really talk with Iraqis and understand the situation through the eyes of our students and break stereotypes about the Middle East. And we're just really proud of all of our students, and we thank them for being ambassadors for Iraq in a special way.
Well, we definitely thank you for giving us this wonderful opportunity. And after spending a couple of years, it started to develop this idea that in my head that ISP is about reconnecting the Iraqi public with the American citizens, is to show people that we are humans and we care about many things and we seek peace and we would like to be friends with everyone, pretty much, if that's possible. And I think programs such as the Iraqi Student Project could definitely develop that. So what message do you think you guys wanted and still want to deliver through the Iraqi Student Project?
Well, one thing is that we took on something that we didn't know a lot about. We didn't have grand ambitions, kind of small ambitions, but it was so worthwhile in our lives and in the lives of many people on this side, and became worthwhile in the lives not only of the students, but I think of their families and the hope it gave to those families. And that people, ordinary folks like us can do something like this. We had no money from any government. We had no high amount of money at all. It was just kind of shoestring work. We were volunteers. All the people who worked with us in Damascus were volunteers. In the U.S., there's one very poorly paid person who's the director of ISP. That's kind of it. I mean, the money is needed for emergencies with dental work and things like that all the time. The support groups take care of most of that. People can do things like this, for Iraq, for the other people to whom the U.S. owes reparations, to rebuild what we've destroyed, and to understand the power and the beauty and the history and the culture that we have not cared about when we, moved through these countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever it may be.
And remembering the culture of Iraq, because Americans, when they're in grade school, learn all about the cradle of civilization. And if they can put that together in their brain and say, that's Iraq, that's what we destroyed by going to war in 2003. And we wrote a type of an easy blues song that we sang sometimes, especially with groups in the early days of Voices in the Wilderness going to Iraq. And we sang, I'm going to the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization, the land between two rivers. We're going to Mesopotamia. Oh, we're going to the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization. And Taif, this year we'll graduate our third graduating class of ISP students, and there'll be 2 more graduating classes to follow in the future. So we invite people, look at our website and see, hey, do I want to get involved somehow with these students? And another thing I want to ask is this. If listeners are saying, hey, I have a great idea of something I could do, Gabe and I want to tell you, do it. Do that great idea. Implement it in the best way that you can figure it out as you go along. Don't worry about it. Just take your dedication and your good ideas and your creativity and just innovate something that you can create to help bring peace between all of the countries and to help let education be that way to peace.
Thank you, Teresa. That was really moving. As always, we end our podcast with a simple question of why do you think Iraq matters?
It matters because it's the cradle of all humanity, where architecture, medicine, literature, the mythology that we have, everything came from that center, from Iraq, and spiraled out to the west of other civilizations. And Iraq will always matter because it's that heart of humanity. And I want to thank you and EPIC for keeping Iraq in the front of everyone's mindfulness so that we can continue to keep working for peace.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I would really just want to thank you for me as a person, for allowing me to be part of your ISP family that you have been parenting for a few years now. It's been an honor, really. And thank you so much for taking the time and explain to the American public what the Iraqi Student Project is about. and that even grassroots organizations could make huge difference in the lives of many people. You guys have changed the life of 60 individuals, and we thank you for that. Now I would like to introduce a very dear friend of mine, another member of the Iraqi Student Project, Ahmed Tariq. Hello, Ahmed.
Hello, Taif. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So what school did you go to?
I went to Goucher College in Baltimore, Maryland. I graduated in 2013 in May. I studied peace and conflict studies, and I did business management to the side as well.
Excellent. So, Ahmed, we would like to know a little bit about your journey. So let me start with asking you, how was your life in Iraq, and what were the circumstances that forced you to leave?
Okay, well, I was born in Baghdad and lived there until I was 15. When in 2006, at the height of the Civil War, my family received a threatening letter that basically said, you have to leave the country in a week or else ... And in the envelope, there was a small bullet. So my family decided to pick up everything and leave within a week and seek refuge in Syria, in Damascus. I was basically a young Iraqi refugee amongst the 4 million Iraqi refugees that were in Damascus or in Syria at the time. And it was not a very easy transition. The first year was the hardest because none of it really made sense. There was a lot of questions unanswered, like why were we forced to leave? Why were we threatened? Why are we here? Why did we leave everything behind? Things along those lines. And it wasn't an easy thing to deal with for a 15, 16-year-old. Iraqis couldn't work. They weren't allowed to work. They couldn't attend universities. So I was looking into different programs all around the world. The United States was not one of them. And then one day I was signed up to this Google service called Google News, and I was looking, the title was called Iraqi Students. And one day I received this email that basically outlined what the Iraqi Student Project was. And I looked into it. It was too good to be true. And my mother was the one who was like, all right, why don't you apply and see what happens? So I was a little hesitant at first. I didn't really want to pursue my higher education in the United States, given the fact that I was in refuge because of the war that the United States spearheaded. So to me, it was kind of like, why would I want to go study in the United States after what they have done to my country? And to that, I needed some convincing. So my mother was, one day before I submitted my application or started working on it, she said, Ahmed, sit down, look at your hand and see your fingers. I was like, okay. So I looked at my fingers and she said, well, are they all the same length? And I said, no, some of them are long, some of them are short. They're different. They're not all the same. She said, well, so is people. Not everyone is the same. And so you can't generalize. That kind of gave me the open-mindedness of going into this and stepping into the unknown, I guess.
And then you came to the United States, the country that you didn't want to come into initially. So can you tell us a little bit about when you first moved into the U.S., how was your circumstances and how did your perspectives about the United States change?
The first thing that really broke all those stereotypes and preconceived notions that I had about the United States was the program that we did. The first month we were in the United States, and we just rode across New England and interviewed people on the streets, met Iraqi students and American students and people really from all sorts of life. And it was really more of a getting to know the country, and the radio documentary was more about having two Iraqis that have never left the Middle East to, see what people would perceive them as from the first time they meet them.
Sure. And as I understood, you also had the chance to interview a few Iraqi war veterans.
These interviews really were the hardest conversations I've had in my life. I mean, I was talking to those soldiers that I had, interacted with in Iraq, in Baghdad as a little child, and they were, I got the opportunity to talk to the person behind the uniform, and that was a very, very much an eye-opening experience for me because I got to really see the other side more clearly. Almost all of them, they were genuinely interested in knowing what we aspire to do for our country, and they needed to explain themselves and their motivations of going into Iraq and their sacrifices and things that, I mean, almost all of them really, across the board, the motivation of going into Iraq was we went there for human rights and democracy and give the Iraqi people those things that they didn't have. And then they realized that they weren't really accomplishing that there through, military presence.
Yeah.
And that to them was a huge, emotional thing to deal with. And they really just realized that you can't really bring about a democratic process through military intervention. And that to me was really, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back. My entire image and idea of the United States changed when I talked to those people. And I understood that I can't generalize.
Well, Ahmed, thank you so much for coming into our podcast. We are really pleased to have you, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you, guys, and for all the programs that you do. I'm a big fan.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And now, I'd like to introduce another ISB student and a very close friend of mine, Sarah Sabah. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your life in Iraq and what were the circumstances that forced you to leave?
My life in Iraq, I was born and raised in Baghdad, lived there with my family, and I never thought I'd ever leave the country, ever. And I had hopes and dreams of becoming something and graduating from college in Baghdad. All of this changed when my high school, I was a high school for girls in Baghdad, and my school received threat letters by an extremist group that they were complaining that about the girls' uniforms, which was, just white shirt and dark blue skirt. A week later, this extremist group, they put a bombed car by my high school, and it went off. Luckily, nobody got hurt, nobody died. But it was a very chaotic situation. Panic was everywhere. Parents were running around trying to pick up the girls from school. And then after we got home, my parents were like, this is it. We're leaving the country. And that's when we picked up our stuff, and we didn't have any time to organize and plan what we're going to do when we get to Syria. My parents' main focus was just to get us somewhere safe. And that was in 2006.
Now let's move a little bit to a lighter, happier note. The Iraqi Student Project. How did you hear about this program and what did it mean to you? I mean, to me, the Iraqi Student Project means a lot because it has changed my life. It taught me a lot of lessons. It was the only place where I felt welcomed. There were students from all different kind of ethnicities and religious backgrounds, but all of that did not matter. We were all under the same roof.
Yep. Okay. First of all, I have to tell you about how did I hear about the ISV. For me, it was a really funny story. After I graduated high school in Syria, in the Syrian system, I couldn't go to college. So I was taking classes at an engineering institute. And then I decided to go work and volunteer for the UNHCR to help out with other refugees and just kill my spare time. And then this lady, she was telling me, oh, I know this program that it's really, fit for you. It's called the Iraqi Student Project. And I just gave her this look and I was like, yeah, that's nice. Just give me the form to volunteer for the UN. I don't need this. This sound too good to be true. And I don't think this is real. I thought it was a scam for real. 2 months later, I was talking to my dad and he was like, really? And that happened 2 months ago? Why didn't you tell me? Well, let's go check it out, And I was like, okay, Dad. So we contacted that lady and I told her, yeah, send me up with an interview. We want to see how it is. And the whole family came with me. We're like, oh yeah, let's go see what it is, So in case something goes wrong, I have my family to protect me.
Yeah.
And here I am. I walk into this underground cafe and I saw Teresa and Gabe, and there were some other ISB students. And Teresa was like, hey, welcome, is she? And then we had the interview, and it was just so fun. And I had so much fun talking to Teresa and Gabe, and I had no idea what I'm expecting. And it meant hope, like a breath of fresh air. We were all in the same age. We all come in from different backgrounds, different circumstances. We all had our own different reasons to escape the country. Yet we were all gathered in this one small group facing the same fate in Syria. Yet all of us found this hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're all waiting for this expectation. We don't even know if it was going to be guaranteed success or not, but we were all there holding hands, waiting for it.
And I could testify to that myself just because being a refugee in Syria was super hard, and having the opportunity that someone comes in and say, hey, come over and we're going to help you get your higher education was an extremely phenomenal opportunity for all of us, I think. So you came to the US the same year I did, 2008. So right now, do you feel like you changed some people's mentalities or perceptions about Iraq and Iraqis?
I went to Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri. I tried to educate the people on campus. I made sure to get involved with more than just one student organization because I was the only Iraqi in there, and I needed to reach as many people as I can and educate as many people as I can about who I am, my culture. The mission is still going. It hasn't stopped.
Thanks, Sarah, for coming into our podcast today and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me here, and good luck with all the other episodes.
Thank you. And finally, thank you to all our guests who joined us today to talk about their journeys with the Iraqi Student Project.
This land is my land, from Oramadi on to Bakuba, from the Zagro Mountains to the Basra waters. This land was made for you and me.
This is EPIC Director Erik Gustafson. In his State of the Union address last month, President Barack Obama conveyed a strong U.S. commitment to continue the fight against terrorism. He addressed the crisis in Syria and spoke at considerable length about Iran. And he mentioned Iraq 3 times. Here are a few excerpts from the President's remarks and EPIC's official response.
When I took office, nearly 180,000 Americans were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, all our troops are out of Iraq.
That is indeed true, and for many Americans comes as a relief to know. Yet, while U.S. direct military involvement in Iraq may be over, the war there continues. The United Nations reports violent attacks across Iraq in 2013 killed 8,868 people, including thousands of women and children, making 2013 the deadliest year since 2008. While U.S. troops may no longer be fighting and dying in Iraq, the country is far from being at peace, nor, for that matter, is the region. No matter how weary Americans may be about Iraq, it is time to end the idea that there can ever be any closure as long as the war and regional conflict continue.
For while our relationship with Afghanistan will change, one thing will not: our resolve that terrorists do not launch attacks against our country. The fact is, that danger remains. While we've put al-Qaeda's core leadership on a path to defeat, the threat has evolved as al-Qaeda affiliates and other extremists take root.
In 2011, al-Qaeda appeared to be all but vanquished from Iraq, or at the very least driven underground. Today, al-Qaeda in Iraq, which now calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and other extremists are resurgent. In recent weeks, al-Qaeda militants recaptured the city of Fallujah, and today more territory is under the black flag of al-Qaeda than ever before. That ought to prompt a serious review of our current strategy. Al-Qaeda affiliates and extremists emerge from failed states and authoritarian regimes where attacks on the rights and dignity of an entire population or group of people through repression, discrimination, or neglect creates an environment where the doctrines of extremism take root. The U.S. and international community, including governments in the region, would be wise to recognize the need for a more holistic approach that does more to address the environment that gives rise to terrorism. By now, it should also be clear that pursuing so-called military solutions, such as killing and capturing suspected terrorists, only makes the situation worse, whether that killing and capturing is done by the United States or through our quote-unquote foreign partners.
In Yemen, Somalia, Iraq, Mali, we have to keep working with partners to disrupt and disable those networks.
Intentional or not, it is highly problematic to group Iraq with Yemen, Somalia, and Mali. This is a slight that will not be lost on Baghdad and many Iraqis. Iraq is not as underdeveloped or poor in resources as Yemen, Somalia, or Mali. Nor has Iraq been in a state of civil war and turmoil for 23 years like Somalia. If that's the road that the Obama administration is now willing to permit for Iraq, then why are we selling so many weapons to the government of Iraq? No, what is needed is a holistic strategy that focuses far more attention and efforts on addressing Iraq's governance problems that we contributed to by rushing Iraq's political transition. Remember, while it took America's founding fathers more than a decade to develop and ratify the Constitution of the United States, we pushed Iraq to write and ratify their constitution within months, followed by swift elections that triggered a civil war in Iraq and a wider conflict in the region. And then, following the so-called surge, which began in 2007, and the withdrawal of U.S. forces, which was completed in 2011, we largely quit the region for years, leaving many critical issues unresolved. Consider where that has already gotten us. In Syria, for example, contributing to the single worst humanitarian catastrophe of the 21st century. As long as the violence persists, as long as people are driven from their homes, as long as there's a need for healing and rebuilding, we have an obligation to do what we can. And that support ought to come in the form of more than just aid. It must include the hard work of diplomacy and a greater level of engagement by President Obama himself. Doing so demonstrates our recognition that we too share some responsibility for what's happening in Iraq and in the region today, which can go a long way to mend fences, repair the damage that has been done, and improve America's standing in the world.
And finally, let's remember that our leadership is defined not just by our defense against threats, but by the enormous opportunities to do good and promote understanding around the globe, to forge greater cooperation, to expand new markets, to free people from fear and want.
Agreed. This statement, like many of the statements made by the President in his State of the Union address, are things that we can all agree with. What we hope to see going forward is a clear long-term strategy and commitment for peace in Iraq and the region. Because after all, as the President said, we do these things because they promote our long-term security. And we do them because we believe in the inherent dignity and equality of every human being, regardless of race, religion, or creed.
And now, a humanitarian update. January was the deadliest year in Iraq since 2008, with over 1,000 deaths reported. Additionally, Human Rights Watch just released a report detailing abuses of women prisoners in Iraq. The 105-page report is based on interviews with women, girls, their families and lawyers, and medical workers in the detention centers. The report claims use of torture methods, including electric shock and sexual abuse during interrogations, and slams the Iraqi justice system, calling for immediate reform. Meanwhile, the refugee crisis continues to grow as more and more people are forced to leave their homes in the Anbar province and come over into Iraq from Syria due to the civil war. On behalf of EPIC, we'd like to thank Gabe, Teresa, Ahmed, and Sarah for joining us on this week's episode. Before we go, we'd also like to thank you, our listeners, for voting for us on Podcast Land and making us the #1 podcast in our category. Thanks to your help, we're putting Iraq back on the agenda. This is Julia Uriarte, reminding you that Iraq matters.